I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Here's something to ponder. What made Sam Raimi's Spider-Man so great? Was it the somewhat cheesy acting or the candy-colored cinematography? Or was it Willem Dafoe's way-over-the-top performance as Green Goblin? Despite some minor flaws, Spider-Man is widely acclaimed and looked at as the template for what a good superhero movie should be. Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man meets all of the same benchmarks, plus has a better cast, and is yet looked at as lesser than the Raimi version. I contend that not only is The Amazing Spider-Man better than Raimi's original, it is very close to being the best of all the Spider-Man films. I'm Alex Mady, and welcome to the Unpopular Opinion. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 is the best in the original trilogy because it gets right into dealing with Peter Parker facing off not only against Dr. Octopus but as well as the growing suspicions from his friend Harry Osborn. The crux of Raimi's trilogy has always been Tobey Maguire and James Franco, whose story culminated successfully in Spider-Man 3. What Raimi's films never got right was Peter Parker and his relationship with Mary Jane and Aunt May. The Amazing Spider-Man manages to hit all of those notes as well as setting up a franchise that matches Stan Lee's original vision for the character. The Amazing Spider-Man keeps Peter Parker in high school for the duration of the film, the setting from the comic book that fostered his development as a hero and a character. Forcing Peter to deal with bullies, girls, and all of the rest of the typical American teenager problems faced every day by Spidey's fans. Raimi's Spider-Man jumped right past high school and into the college years, which skimped viewers on the ideal setting for the web-slinger. While I am not sold on the rebooted origin featuring Peter's parents as integral parts of his superpowers, we now have an angsty teen who is swarming with hormones, which was a fertile ground for multiple future stories. I was among numerous fans who cried that we didn't need yet another superhero origin film, but without Maguire or Dunst returning, there was no choice. Raimi had practically exhausted the story for all it was worth. The only other setting possible with college and high school ruled out would be a working-class Parker, and that likely would not have appealed as much to a youthful focus on the character. Tobey Maguire was 27 years old when Spider-Man was released, while Andrew Garfield was 29, and yet Garfield is much more convincing as a high schooler than Maguire ever was. Does that mean Andrew Garfield was the better actor? We could argue that filmographies of both actors, but I will absolutely say he is a better Spider-Man. Spider-Man was always a sarcastic smartass in the written page, something Maguire barely scratched the surface of. Garfield had all of the full-of-himself vigor and devil-may-care attitude that makes Spider-Man both a hero and incredibly reckless.
Just let me go.
Is that a knife? Is that a real knife?
Yes, it's a real knife.
My weakness, it's small knives.
Just let me go.
Anything but knives!
Oh, it's so simple.
He also bears the scars of an embattled hero better than any comic character on screen, aside from Christopher Nolan's Batman. And then there's Emma Stone. Oh, sweet Emma Stone. What a perfect piece of casting genius. Stone was originally expected to play Mary Jane Watson, taking over from Kirsten Dunst based on her famous red hair, but, thankfully, we instead got a faithful interpretation of Gwen Stacy, much different from the wasted performance from Bryce Dallas Howard in Spider-Man 3. Stone, like Garfield, comes across like a believable high schooler. In keeping with Spider-Man's eternal flaw in logic, once again the hottest girl in school falls for the geek. We all have dreamed of this happening, but this version of Peter is less a dweeb than an outcast. If Mark Webb and The Amazing Spider-Man got anything perfect, it's the dynamic and chemistry between Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield. At the time, the real-life couple had a connection that jumped off the screen and you really believed they were in love. Webb, who directed another electric couple in Zooey Deschanel and Joseph Gordon-Levitt in 500 Days of Summer, knew how to direct conversations and relationships, which is why those seem to be the best parts of the film and the element that Raimi's movies lacked. Even Aunt May, as played by the great Sally Field, feels more like a real person than the old biddy she had been in the comics. Martin Sheen's fleeting role as Uncle Ben still achieves what it set out to and gets Spider-Man rolling with his true calling. Aunt May has always been Peter Parker's rock, and Field drives that home much like Diane Lane did as Martha Kent in Man of Steel. Instead of giving us a two-dimensional mother image, we have a character with layers who can communicate with our hero and do more than expound narrative. Aunt May is now a major part of Peter's circle who knows his true motivation. She differs from the MCU version played by Marissa Tomei by playing May as slightly older, almost as a grandmother, but with a bit more vigor than Rosemary Harris's more traditional take on the character. The Amazing Spider-Man wanted to emulate the Dark Knight trilogy by setting a superhero in a realistic setting. While a film with monstrous villains and superpowered beings is a far cry from the Nolan comic book noir approach, Sony's creative team essentially nailed the more grounded approach here. The Lizard may not have been the best choice to launch a realistic franchise, but everything else sets up nicely. I know that didn't mean the movie would be truly realistic, but rather evoke the tone and look of Batman Begins. Unlike Raimi's Technicolor universe, that is. 10 years is a lifetime for franchises like this, and these two Spider-Man films are markers for very different universes. The Amazing Spider-Man presents a universe that could conceivably have been shared with the X-Men films if a crossover had ever been possible. Which is why, with some separation between the initial release of The Amazing Spider-Man and now, I can admit I actually like that Peter Parker reveals his identity to multiple characters. At first I thought it was an idiotic decision that ruined the secret part of having a secret identity, but in a world where teenagers have no one on their side, divulging who he is to his closest friends and family would not only be possible, but it also removes the stupidity that characters wouldn't be able to figure it out. Aunt May and Gwen Stacy are not stupid, and they would be able to discern that Peter Parker was actually Spider-Man based on simple deduction. The majority of New York City doesn't know Peter, as they would never figure it out. Finally, we have a movie that doesn't treat those around our hero as morons. The Amazing Spider-Man may not have created the most visually striking villain in Dr. Kurt Connors, aka the Lizard, but they continued their streak of casting high-caliber actors for a goofy role. Rhys Evans brings the most humanity to a Spider-Man villain since the great turn from Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus. Sure, Willem Dafoe was good, but incredibly over the top. What the Lizard shares with Doc Ock is a backstory and a motivation that is sidetracked by their insanity. I don't think I can find higher praise for Even's performance. Despite its shortcomings, I have no doubt that if one of your weakest spots in The Amazing Spider-Man, that whatever comes next has a great first step. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 deviated from the formula set in the movies and became more outlandish and more focused on universe building, but it also did not have to build a new cinematic universe. The Amazing Spider-Man tried to do something different with the characters rather than faithfully adapting the comic books. By building a conspiracy that included Peter's parents as well as Norman Osborn, this take on the story changes the dynamic and gives us something wholly original. Marvel Comics has had multiple reboots and storylines for Spider-Man over the decades, often changing things to reinvent the classic Stan Lee hero for new generations, and The Amazing Spider-Man gets that right. Fans complained about the vastly different look of Spidey's costume, but it looked a hell of a lot more homemade than Tobey Maguire's suit. While Danny Elfman's score for the original Raimi films is still sweeping, James Horner's new theme and soundtrack is equally epic. John Schwartzman's cinematography captures the dark side of New York, but every scene is vibrant and the action very clear despite being set at night most of the time. There is so much to like in this more grounded approach that it still boggles my mind that we didn't get multiple sequels. With the third iteration of Spider-Man, this one part of Marvel Studios' cinematic universe played by Tom Holland, we can look back at the three different takes on Peter Parker and weigh them against one another. While Tobey Maguire was the prototype Spider-Man, he was always too old for the role. Holland is young and gives Peter Parker a post-millennial energy that fits into the MCU storytelling approach despite eliminating the Uncle Ben part of the origin. Actually, Holland's Spider-Man never got a true origin on screen and instead became a surrogate to Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark, which neuters the entire character. That leaves Andrew Garfield's interpretation and Mark Webb's duology as the most accurate depiction of Peter Parker put to film, but done in a wholly original way. But hey, that's just my unpopular opinion. Tell us yours in the comments below. I'm Alex Mady with JOBLO.com.